Hello everyone, we'll be speaking about Parashat Eikev, that's the Parashat of Shavua, and we'll be focusing on one pasuk in particular. It's in the first Aliyah, 8:5. Let's go right into it. So it says, first, the context. This one God is reminiscing, he's discussing some of the events that happened throughout the desert. There's some rebuke going on here, and then we see in 8:5, as in chapter 8, verse 5, V'yadata im levavecha ki kasher yaser ish et bno Hashem Elohecha miyasreka, which in English translates as, thank you Art Scroll, you should know in your heart that just as a father will chastise his son, so Hashem your God chastises you. Now a couple of weeks ago for Parashat Dvarim, we actually discussed, what does chastisement look like? What does the mitzvah of rebuke look like? We said that we can take an example from Moshe, that at first why did he start with the Meraglim instead of the Chere Egel? He discussed the Meraglim first because that is something that the Jews experienced personally on a day-to-day basis. They saw the results of their sin. They had this sin, they had this punishment, this way of Moshe kind of showing, don't you want to get ahead? So it's meant for the person's benefit. That's rule one of rebuke. It has to be for the person's benefit. You can't make the person feel like he's a total loser. That's not the point. That's one. Number two, you have to respect the person, right? That's why Moshe kind of starts a little more gently, a little more obscurely. We're not entirely sure exactly why he's beginning so with these veiled references to sin. Because they need to know that you're not here to smash them and to make them feel worthless. You're here to, as a friend, as a person who's interested in the other person doing better, right? As we said, person who sees your value. So those are lessons. But this mitzvah of rebuke and chastisement requires, a lot of examination. I guess Sefer Dvarim, Chumash Dvarim is the place to do it. So, what is this? How does a person chastise? It's talking about just as a father chastises his son, so too God is chastising us. So I guess we need to examine, what is chastisement supposed to look like? What is discipline supposed to look like? Is it always supposed to be harsh? Is it supposed to be pleasant sometimes? And we turn to our teachers, Rav Volbe, who only passed away about 15 years ago. He was the Mashgiach of the Mir in Jerusalem. He once learned in the Mir, the original Mir, back in Eastern Europe. I believe he actually eventually had to run away to Sweden, I believe, during the World War. Anyway, so he tells us, Rav Volbe, that is, in Planting and Building. It's a small little book on chinuch, on how to raise a Jewish child. So, here we go. He says, parents, when do they discipline? When do they chastise? What should that look like? So, he says, a person, our perspective should not be when to punish as parents. Now, he then asks a question, well, what do you mean? How about, the quote in Mishlei that we have? A very common one is, it's in Mishlei, that is Proverbs 13:7. 13:24, I'm sorry. It's in 13:24 where it says, Chosech shivto sonevno. Person who spares the rod hates his son, right? Hates his child. Spare the rod, you hate your son, right? Now most people think that means we need to beat our children or hurt them, or kind of guide them on the proper way. Now, there's another pasuk that Rav Volbe is careful to quote. He's like, that's true. There is, of course, a rod that spanks and punishes, but there's another one. And then he quotes Zechariah 11:7. Yeah? Please, by all means, look at them inside. That's why I'm giving you the psukim, so you can take a look. Is the following. Sorry. V'arei et tzon ha'ariga. And here's the focus. And I will take for myself 2 rods. To one I called pleasantness. And the other one I called damaging. And I fed the flock. So here we see a very important yesod. There are 2 rods. There's the rod of pleasantness, as quoted in a pasuk in Tanakh. And there's the rod of damaging. There's one that punishes. There's also one that kind of gives positive encouragement that you're supposed to use to build a person. And And that's a very important foundational idea that many people think that's like, if I want to give my child a rod, that means a rod of punishment. But Rav Wolbe is careful to say that, if a child does something good, then you should give them encouragement. You should encourage them. You should compliment them. You should reward them. If a kid behaves properly, give them a piece of chocolate. That's also considered called a rod. You're encouraging them. That's also the rod discussed in Zechariah. And just some that's the basic idea, and just some stories to bring us out of what chastisement looks like, what rebuke looks like. When you're trying to help the person, was in the Holocaust. You can imagine food was not readily available in the camps, to say the least, and people were lining up for their daily ration of bread, which is usually a single slice, and usually they have to eat it quite quickly because there's some people who were aggressive in taking other people's food. So this 10-year-old is standing in line. I don't remember who this is. I heard this story from Rav Bernstein. It's quoted in his book Agadata. Kid is standing in line. He gets his morsel of bread and he immediately stuffs it into his mouth. Understandably, because he's worried someone else would take it. And they're losing a ration of bread for the day could very potentially mean losing your life. It's the Holocaust. So he stuffed it into his mouth. He gets a tap from behind him, turns around. There's this adult who said, "That's not the way a Jew eats bread." So he ripped up half of his own morsel of bread and he gave it to the child. He said, "Here you go. Try again." That's tochacha. Because that's coming not from a place of wanting to destroy, but from a place of wanting to help the other person. And that was clearly obvious since he just gave half of his piece of bread. Right? So that's one illustration. I'll just give you another one. The famous altar of Slobodka, who my yeshiva Machane Yaakov is very much framed around this incredible individual who trained some of the greatest minds in the United States of the previous generation. One of whom was Rav Hutner. So in Slobodka, their Musar was famous. The way they kind of they would educate and discipline. I'm not entirely sure what the exact precise word is in English, but the Musar, the way they would kind of give it to the students to encourage them to grow, was often very nuanced. But sometimes it couldn't be so nuanced. So, for example, Rav Hutner, who was one of these great Rosh Yeshiva, I believe was Rosh Yeshiva of Torah Vadat. He was a Slobodka student. He wrote Pachad Yitzchak. He was the Rebbe of Rav Aaron Feldman, who is the current Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Israel in Baltimore. Rav Aaron Feldman is the Rebbe of my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Gershenfeld. So Rav Hutner was a titanic figure in the United States, and he had a bit of a personality. So obviously that came out when he was a kid. He was an Eloi. He was a genius. He was one of the greatest students in Slobodka at the time. And you can imagine, it's like you have a personality, and you also, you're brilliant. That could often come to a bit of a heads in a yeshiva setting. So the altar had to deal with him. And at Rav Hutner's funeral, people knew that when Rav Hutner was a child, the altar would just ream him and scream at him and yell at him and just constantly give it to him. Fine. And of course he became Rav Hutner, right? He became the Rosh Yeshiva of Torah Vadat. Years later, at Rav Hutner's Shiva, Rav Wolbe, who wrote this Planting and Building book, we just quoted, the rod of pleasantness, the rod of damaging, right? So he spoke with Rav Hutner and said, you could really get a sense of Rav Hutner's greatness by the fact that, the altar could just, give him such harsh musar, just kind of screaming at him and yelling. We just said the rod of pleasantness, what happened to that? But no, the altar was able to slam him, and Rav Hutner could take it. And that was Rav Hutner's greatness. Someone else happened to be at that Shiva, and I believe went to Rav Wolbe afterwards. I don't remember the name of this Rav, but he happened to know, I believe, Rav Hutner, and I think actually learned with Rav Hutner in Slobodka. So he went to Rav Wolbe, and he said, "You totally misunderstood that story. The greatness was not with Rav Hutner. The greatness was with the altar of Slobodka." Why? What does that mean? The altar of Slobodka was giving the most serious one screaming at Rav Hutner, and Hutner was able to take it. So what does that mean that the greatness was with the altar? It means, he explained, that the altar had such a deep love for Rav Hutner, and Rav Hutner knew that. He could see it in the altar, that's what allowed Rav Hutner to take that musar and to internalize it and to actually use it constructively. Because often, when people yell at us, they're not really doing it for our benefit. They're yelling at us because they want to yell at us. They have an agenda, makes them feel better, makes them feel like they're morally superior. That's not where the altar of Slobodka was coming from. Rav Hutner knew that the altar had such a deep love and affection for him that he was able to take that screaming, something so harsh, and he was able to use it in a constructive fashion. That was the greatness. Of course, there was greatness in Rav Hutner for being able to take it anyway. But the fact that his ability to be a receptacle for that kind of criticism was made possible by the love that the altar had for his students, and that's a very important message. That as we go through life, again, this whole Chumash in a way is, or very much of it is kind of tochacha. It's rebuke. God's rebuking the Jewish people. Moshe is rebuking the Jewish people, but we have to understand that it's coming from love. Just as the pasuk says, as a father chastises his son, so too Hashem chastises us. Thank you so much. Shabbat shalom.